Hey everyone, Andy Raffel from eTeknix.com, and today we're looking at the Z490I AORUS Ultra. It's so tiny. Let's do this. The Virtuoso RGB Wireless SE headset from Corsair. With a sleek premium lightweight design, comfortable memory foam ear cups and subtle RGB lighting, it doesn't look like your typical gaming headset. With a detachable broadcast grade microphone, patented slipstream wireless technology and tuned 50mm neodymium premium drivers, it's simply the best headset Corsair have ever created. Find out more by clicking the link in the description below. So before I actually get started, there is something I do need to say. We're filming this video before we're actually testing. And yeah, that's not exactly going without its problems. So we're going to have all the benchmarks, the overclocking results, everything that you kind of want to know about this board and all the other boards that we're testing. But it is going to be at the end of this video, and I'm not really going to be able to comment on it just because of the timeline of the way that we're kind of doing things. But without further ado, let's kind of jump straight into it. So it's an ITX motherboard, and I mean, based on the Z390 version of this, it does seem like they've kind of stepped up their game a little bit, and hopefully that is the case because this actually comes in a little bit more expensive. So in terms of the pricing, it's coming in at $269 in the US and about £255 in the UK. Now this does mean that it's coming in slightly cheaper than the ASUS ITX Z490 offering. It does, however, mean that it's coming in a little bit more expensive in comparison to the Z390 Mini-ITX board that AORUS brought out, which actually came in at around $165 at launch MSRP. So do we get, a lot more for our money because it does cost a lot more? Well, straight away from a design standpoint, I can see that it probably does. I mean, comparing this to the Z390, it does seem like it has a much larger heatsink area, which kind of covers pretty much from the top of the board down to the bottom of the board and encompasses into that rear I/O. There's also a larger heatsink over the PCH chipset and where the M.2 slot is. It just seems like this board is a little bit more mature and a little bit more premium in comparison to its predecessor. So I guess, yes, if you're paying a little bit more money, that's kind of what you're getting above and beyond that. But what does that actually mean for kind of, real world usage and other features that you get included on the board? So when it comes to lighting on an ITX board, you generally don't get a mass amount on there. You normally, and pretty much with this board, get a strip that kind of aligns down this side at the rear of the board, which is quite nice actually, because once it's inside your case, it kind of bounces off the case a little bit. You gotta imagine if your motherboard case is here, you'll have the standoffs in the board sitting there, it just allows that light to kind of bounce off and go towards the front of the case. Obviously it doesn't stop there. If you do want extra lighting, then there is an addressable header and a normal RGB header. This means you could break it out into some kind of a hub where you could have all your fans and everything in there. I mean, I'm not really expecting you to have mass amounts of lights in a Mini-ITX system. You're not going to have mass amounts of RGB fans purely because the type of case you're going to put this in isn't going to have the room for it. Personally, I would have liked the positioning of the headers to be a little bit better. They're just not quite in the places where I'd want them to be to kind of have them clean cable runs. Especially when you think about RGB headers, they're quite kind of chunky and cumbersome. Hopefully you know and you kind of know what I mean and kind of get what I'm actually getting at. So the problem with Mini-ITX boards, generally speaking, is trying to cram as much kind of features and parts onto the actual board while trying to keep that footprint, as small as possible. And even though they've managed to cram quite a lot of features into this, the CPU socket, there's still quite a lot of room there. I mean, you're not going to have any kind of clearance issues with CPU coolers or anything like that. If you really wanted to, I don't know why you'd want to, but you could strap, a deep core Assassin or a Noctua D15. You're not really going to have any problem with AIOs, even with kind of the tubes coming out the side or anything like that. So you're not going to have to worry. Now, sticking with the CPU socket, just around it, we have 8 power phases, which I believe is a little bit of a step up from Z390. The biggest step up is the fact that it uses 90 amp chokes and 90 amp power stages, whatever you want to call them, VRMs, phases, it all means the same kind of stuff. 90 amps. That has actually meant that they do have to use a slightly improved PCB. So what you'll find with this board is that it does have a 10-layer PCB. I mean, yeah, 90 amps. Toasty! To deliver that amount of monumental power, it has got a single 8-pin power connector, but it has got some shielded armor on there as well, which not just only kind of adds to the look and style of it, it is said to, stop interference, and it does have the solid pins on there for the very best connectivity to give you clean and kind of stable power. So yeah, it all sounds pretty good, especially for a board that's, this kind of form factor. I love it when people have Mini-ITX boards and they kind of call them, a pint-sized powerhouse. This, well, it's no different.
Now with all that power running through the board, you are going to have, I guess issues with temperatures and heat. So they have strapped some pretty large coolers on here. So we have this heatsink at the top, which, is modest in size, but you do have a larger one coming down here, and it is connected by a heat pipe. The only other kind of heatsink on here, as I mentioned, is the one over the PCX chipset, which also covers over the M.2 slots. Now, normally with a Mini-ITX board, just like this one, you will have space for one M.2 under here and also one on the rear. So it's hidden and kind of out the way. Now, it is worth noting we have looked at other boards like ones from Asus, where instead of having it on the rear, they've actually got two on the front. Personally, I like having the one on the rear. In most cases, you're not going to have a problem trying to get to it. There's normally a cutout around the CPU socket, so you can still actually get to that M.2 slot without any problems. If you're after something maybe a little bit slower, there are 4 SATA ports on here. Nothing kind of out of the ordinary. It's pretty much what you'd expect on a board of this form factor. In terms of the memory support, this board is just, well, it's batshit crazy, I'm going to be honest. It accepts up to 64 gig, which is about normal for a Mini-ITX board, of DDR4 5000 megahertz. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous for a Mini-ITX board, but I've got to be honest, I kind of love it. 5000 megahertz. Crazy. Now, also being a Mini-ITX board, it does only have one X16 slot on here, but you will find that it has metal shielded armor on there again for styling purposes, as well as to kind of give you the very best contact and less interference. It is also worth noting with the M.2 slots, both of them, as well as the X16 slot, they are PCI Express 4.0 ready. So in theory, when Rocket Lake actually arrives, potentially sometime later on in this year, you aren't going to have any problems running them blistering fast M.2 storage drives and even some of the PCI Express 4.0 graphics cards that are out. For your front panel headers, we have plenty of USBs. There's USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C, there's USB 3.2 Gen 1, and also some legacy USB 2.0 headers on the board as well. So considering its form factor, there's quite a lot going on. When it comes to the audio, there's nothing really out of the ordinary there. It uses the Realtek ALC 1220 VB 7.1 channel HD audio, but it does support things like DTS X Ultra as well. So yeah, I mean, they weren't going to be able to cram anything too extravagant on it, but it's going to be enough for the majority of the users out there to give you crystal clear clarity, even when it comes to your microphone, as well as listening to stuff through headphones or speakers. And lastly, finishing off with the rear I/O. As I mentioned earlier, it does kind of encompass as part of the board, which is really nice. I really wish kind of every manufacturer of motherboard for all of their motherboards did it. It just saves so much hassle not having a rear I/O plate, and it looks a lot better. There's a little bit of Aorus styling on there, and for the most part, it's just, well, it's full of USBs. We've got Type-C, we've got USB 3.2 Gen 2, Gen 1, USB 2.0, HDMI DisplayPort, so if you are using this with an iGPU, you've got the flexibility there. It's got a Q-Flash BIOS button as well, so making things a little bit easier if you are having to kind of troubleshoot and things like that. It has got 2.5G Ethernet as well, which is quite nice to have on a board of this kind of structure. And it has Intel Wi-Fi 6 AX. And then 3 audio jacks. Sadly, no optical SD diff, but you normally wouldn't expect that on a Mini-ITX board anyway. So there you go, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. And as I mentioned, don't just kind of, stop there. We have got all the overclocking and the benchmarks and everything for this board against some of the kind of comparative boards out there at the end of this video. So yeah, purely because I'm filming this before testing, it just makes things a little bit tricky. So I will leave you with all of that good stuff, and let me know what you think in the comments section below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, you know exactly what to do, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye-bye. 5000 megahertz.